So, for the past year, there has been an energy crisis in Europe. And of course, it's only gotten worse in the past, say, 6 months because of a certain conflict going on in Ukraine. And during this conflict, Europe and the United States, basically all the NATO countries and EU countries, uh, they sanctioned Russia. And for a while, it did collapse the entire Russian economy, and then Russia just bounced right back, and it did basically nothing. And in response to the EU and the United States sanctioning the banks and many Russian bureaucrats, Russia conveniently had a leak in Nord Stream 1 that they told the EU they could not fix because of the strenuous sanctions. And the one you might hear of particularly often is the one up here at Nord Stream 1. Nord Stream 2 is dotted out because it was canceled. Uh, Nord Stream 2 was supposed to be constructed, I think, sometime this year, but the invasion in Ukraine and the sanctions cut off all plans for Nord Stream 2. And now the EU is facing blowback from that. Not necessarily because of anything Russia's doing in particular, but because of Europe's new energy crisis, or at least the new phase of it, where the EU, or not really the EU, but many countries within the EU, are, as France puts it, going into an age of energy sobriety. Uh, Many countries in the EU, specifically nations like Germany and Italy, are all putting restrictions on how much you can heat your homes, how much you can heat your homes, or lighting up giant billboards or whatever. And save your gasps and your protests, but Germany is actually canceling their yearly lighting of their Christmas tree. I know. Tragic. Even though it only takes up like 1% of their cities or Berlin's energy usage every year, but or at least in December. So Europe is in a lot of trouble, and Russia is not. Yeah, Russia. Is not holding back. Yeah, Russia said basically, if Nord Stream 1 was so good, why don't you make a Nord Stream 2? It's it, Putin says Russia is not responsible for EU's energy crisis. It needs to push the button on Nord Stream 2. Just press the button. Russia is using this as an opportunity. Yeah, they're using this as an opportunity to try and build up their oil industry. I have no clue if this was at all intentional. But yeah, they did not save time, or they did not waste time. The moment Europe starts putting in uh, restrictions for their energy uses, Putin opens up the door for Nord Stream 2 again. And of course, Europe's not going to take this. And for the past 2 months or so, there have been protests all around Europe. Belgium just had one today, as I'm recording this, at least. Around 5,000 people, I think, came out in protest of not just the rising energy costs, but the rising food costs as well. Which I'd imagine rising food costs come from transport as well. Uh, Czechia, I believe it's called. Is it? I almost said Czechoslovakia. Czechia had protests earlier this month. It was not only anti, or it was not only in protest of the energy usage, but it was also in protest of the EU and NATO, in support of Ukraine in general. And it was a massive protest too, like 70,000 people. 70,000 people in Prague came out in protest of this. Uh, France also had protests. Let's think about it. No. France also had protests, and they got results. About $26 billion bill to keep energy affordable for the next 6 months. Not sure how that's going to work, especially since, especially throughout the winter. Uh, and telling people not to heat up their homes during the winter is probably not a good idea, but EU countries are doing that anyway. Yeah, few days ago, or earlier this month, the EU did come together, and the day after the 70,000 people came out in Prague, the EU decided that they would, in fact, actually do something. The day after, uh, France, or and they're trying to come up with a plan to basically you to try and get through the winter, by just telling people not to heat up their homes. uh, Germany is actually doing something, at least. They nationalized their oil industry. But I'm not expecting anything good to come out of this. I don't think Europe is going to take the offer on Nord Stream 2, even if it would help. Uh, Gee. Basically, the EU is only interested in punishing Russia, unfortunately, instead of helping their own people. If anything, the war in Russia is already coming to a close. Honestly, I think they should just take Nord Stream 2. I think they should just take the morality hit to help their own people, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, unfortunately.